Well, hello, ni hao. Depending on where you're joining us, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to our first digital talk for our Hello China campaign. I'm Aslina Bulma, I'm the Director of International at RIBA. Thank you for joining us for this talk with Professor Zhang Li, the newly appointed Dean of Architecture and Vice Principal of FADI, Tsinghua University, and Lead Architect of Teamminus. We are thrilled to be streaming Professor Zhang direct from Beijing for this talk, while all of us are based across the world, some of us at home and others at the office perhaps. I realize it is Eid for our Muslim friends. On behalf of our IBA, Eid Mubarak to those celebrating, and my son has reminded me that it is also Yorkshire Day because we live in York. I know there are a couple of people watching this from Yorkshire, so I hope they have their traditional flat cap on. We are incredibly excited to be delivering this program of talks, which will showcase the best in contemporary architecture and emerging voices in China. Before I introduce our very eminent speaker, I just want to say how pleased our IBA is with the many connections we have forged in China and surrounding area since the opening of our offices in Shanghai in December 2019. The opening of our offices in Shanghai and Sharjah last year really has enhanced the global connection of RIBA global community, enabling exchanges no matter where one may be. This increasingly vibrant global community has been integral in keeping us all together, particularly during this troubling time in 2020. Early in 2020, Umi Liu was appointed as RIBA Head of Business Development who's based in Shanghai. And Umi is very much leading all of RIBA's work in China. I would like to thank her for all her efforts. RIBA launched Hello China campaign earlier this summer, where we are delivering a series of events and thought leadership. And we've got a wonderful series of activities throughout China. Keep a tab on our Chinese website for more information, and that's www.riba.org.cn. And also RIBA WeChat for those outside China, for those in China. Now, moving on to our speaker for today, I'm particularly pleased to be introducing Professor Zhang Li, and I'm very happy that he's our speaker for this inaugural lecture. I first met Li in Beijing about 18 months ago at a small event in Beijing, and we've kept in touch. Li delivered a rather fabulous talk at Design China Beijing in September last year, which RIBA co-organized, and I remember very much how the audience were completely mesmerized by his work. Professor Li needs little, if any, introduction at all, I'm sure. His resume is very impressive indeed. Zhang Li is the lead architect of award-winning practice Teamminus in Beijing, whose ethos is based around producing an alternative modernity in China. His work in research and practice is focused on the human body and space and design of active urban spaces. He has an influential role in the Chinese architecture scene as the architect-in-chief of now I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, I'm sure, Zhangjiakou Zone and Zhogang Big Air, both for the big Beijing Winter Olympics and the roof gardens of China Pavilion in Shanghai Expo in 2010. He's also been appointed as curator of the Venice Pavilion for Beijing in May 2021. He is a standing board member of the Architecture Society of China and editor-in-chief of the Chinese magazine World of Architecture. And most recently, Li was appointed as the Dean of Architecture and Vice Principal at Tsinghua University, one of the top 10 architecture schools in the world. It was wonderful news. Huge congratulations to Professor Zhang, and it is a very well-deserved appointment too. I had a pleasure of visiting Tsinghua in December last year, and I was very impressed with the school and wonderful students as well. And I'm sure you're looking forward to this talk as much as I am. So I'm going to hand over to Zhang Li immediately. But before I do so, just a couple of housekeeping points. Since we are using Zoom webinar for this event, we cannot see or hear the audience. So do use that chat. Tell us where you are. Should you have any queries, the chat function will allow us to see that. But if you have a specific question that you would like Lee to answer at the end of his talk, please use the Q&A function so we can get back to you and ask Lee that question. If you are a Twitter user, please feel free to use the hashtag @RIBA and also for those in China, RIBA WeChat ID. There will be an opportunity for questions that I said from the audience, so please bear that in mind and use the Q&A function in Zoom to do so. We will not be actively monitoring the chat bot for questions, so just bear that in mind as well. Well, that's all from me, and I'm very happy to now hand over to Zhang Li for his talk. Lee, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lena. My thanks to RIBA China, my thanks to Lena, to Wumi, and to Stuart from Mantis Broadcasting for broadening this event, making it possible. It's a great privilege to speak at this event, this online event, because the world is currently, of course, still dealing with COVID at the moment. But what better things to do than to talk about architecture at this moment, and which simply brings people together in the same physical space. Let's just wish we will be able to do that very soon. I'm going to share my screen to look at the PowerPoint presentation. The topic for today is the body playful, designing for movements in Chinese public spaces. This topic is basically linked to the fact that the body of any creature serves two major purposes. One is to survive, and the other is to make the survival better, more pleasing. It's an inherent feature of all creatures to use the body to understand the world, to perceive all the great things around itself, like this elephant. In the history of Chinese and Western architecture, of course, that goes to a separate topic, probably a separate lecture. Had different views on the human body. In the West, in Western architectural history, the human body is very present. You have all the ideas, all the works, and all the anthropomorphic, wonderful works and implementations of the beautiful proportions of the human body. Of course, here you see Socrates, of course, and slightly beautified one of this ancient Western Greek sage. And this is in the 14th century painting where the body of a Chinese sage was depicted, is Zhang. There's basically, and the body is at its best status when he is sleeping. And all the roughness, all the textures of the environment surrounding him would be better understood and more clearly felt during the sleep. So pretty different understanding and use of human body. And if we look at this is Titian, Venus of Urbino, you do here see the very precise depiction of the beauty of a body. This is the depiction in the 4th century Chinese painting. If there was one Chinese painting about female beauty, this was the one. But actually what you hear, you don't see very much the body, but the trace of the movement of that body built entirely upon a famous Chinese poem. So if we may, to paint with a broad brush, to simplify a bit, in the Western tradition, you do have in the city and also in the space around us, when we talk about the human body, the idea is very much about the presence of the human body. It's more optical. It's anatomical and kinematic truth and of the human body. And in the Chinese tradition, there used to be an absence of the body. When you talk about body, you see traces of the body, you see the elusive physiological, essential fantasies about the body, but the body's, for most of the time, it's simply absent. And only in the recent centuries, this is in the late 18th century, when Chinese painters were doing this kind of experiment. This is by the painter Shi Tao, who drew also upon a famous ancient Chinese poem about an intellectual residing in his countryside house, and in drawing his this kind of fusion of his body with the environment. You do see here the body gradually turns into the flowers and plants around him. And this is a painting done for the Emperor Qianlong in the early 18th century. It was done by the Italian and very well-known painter who had worked in China for almost his entire career, Castiglione. This painting is about hunting, is about the collective display of the strength of the body. And of course, in this dynasty in China was ruled by the Qing dynasty, which is very much emphasizing on the strength of the body, because they have this kind of nomadic traditions compared to Han Chinese in central area of China. So all of these kind of individual and collective displays, if we skip 2 century or 3 century worth of history, we go directly to this century, to this moment of the 21st century here, with the growing middle class. With the urbanization, you do see the human bodies become more and more of a topic. It's no longer absent, but coming back to life, and very much matters very much in everyone's ideas and concepts about how a healthy and prosperous urban life should be like. Individual expressions and collective expressions. So for the Chinese architecture, it used to be, like 2 decades ago, it used to be about all these iconic buildings, but nowadays is more about the daily lives, how public spaces, how the shared public facilities may work and may re-linked to the human body. And that is very much the topic that we are going to talk about today. We've learned this kind of relation between the human body and the space in a pretty steep learning curve, and very gradually get to the understanding that there is a way and there is a possible methodology to connect the human body to the space. It can be done on 5 scales. The first scale is the macro scale. It's an urban scale and work for a great number of people, hundreds at least. Typically, it's an urban setup, how this urban space may help the human body to move freely and to create moments of enjoyments. And the second scale is what we call it the collective. It deals with from dozens of people to a few hundreds, is the typical community space. And in this kind of scale, you do have people actually reading each other's facial expressions. The third scale is the intermediate scale, and it deals with dozens of people, typically a work group inside an office, or a group traveling to a natural environment, sharing a bus. In this kind of scale, people not only know each other, they also talk to each other. You do witness the effects of the body language and all this kind of extra communication generated by the movement of human body inside the group. The fourth scale is very intimate. It only deals with 2 to 7 people or 8 people is basically the size of a family. It's very intimate, and you feel relaxed and you feel safe inside these kind of spaces. Whenever you and someone else are put in such spaces, similarly, with the similar effect of staying at home, you do feel that actually the body relationship between these people inside such space getting more and more intense. And the fifth scale is an individual scale. It deals with only one person. It's the surfaces and all the objects that you can touch, that you can feel with your personal senses. So the first project, and that is long before we got to a conscious understanding or a conscious objective of designing for the body and the space. But in a retrospective way, we believe this was how it started. It was in the Chinese northwest province of Gansu in a mining city. There's a nickel mining city of Jinchang is the culture center. It deals with scale 3 and 4, which is intermediate and intimate. And the space that relates the bodies are actually behind this and quite particular facade. And this one, you have an indoor promenade linking all the 3 major functional spaces: a library, a museum, and a small meeting or convention center, and all connected to this corridor or concourse behind this facade. It's a mining city and only founded in the 1980s with the discovery of a large nickel mine. The city was basically featureless. It's kind of typical generic city setups, but it does have quite unique mountain features, and which is also the source of inspiration for our facade. And we adopted the special orientation of the building, which is south and west, and we create all these solid walls facing the west and all the glazed walls facing south to create this zigzag shape. And then you have all the corners along this linear space that individual people and a small group of people can link their body with. It's a pretty low cost building, quite an affordable building. All the interior finishing was done with artificial flooring, the most available artificial flooring. So outside and inside in these corners, you do find people doing some sort of activities. The second project was back in 2010. It was a renovation project, not in the right scale perhaps. This is located in the central Pudong area of Beijing, Nanluoguxiang. If you know Beijing well, you know if you travel to Beijing and want to see and the life inside the Hutong, then Nanluoguxiang is the place. But for whatever reasons, in the 1950s, there was a 4-story building right next to this Hutong, and it was kept, and then later transferred to a commercial facility. And what we've done is to reconvert, to renovate that commercial facility back to a tourist visitor center for the Hutong area. It deals again with intermediate scale and intimate scale. The problem was quite obvious because the building was huge compared to all the Hutong fabric. So we need to somehow downplay the scale a bit, at least linking the building to the fabric surrounding it. So we create this redundant staircases, and because of the function of the building requires 2 major functions. One is used as a display center for the Hutong area, which is directly accessible from the ground. And the other is all the cultural facilities from the first floor and above. So we used this kind of stair to reduce the scale of the building and somehow connect it to the urban Hutong landscape. And this is before and after. Before and after. And in this map, you do see the quite strange orchid position the building is, its scale as compared to the Hutong fabric. But the contrast is very stark. So the strategy, of course, includes the reuse of the indoor spaces, which is not the topic of today, adding a layer of brick to somehow tame the size of the building when it's facing the Hutong area. And this is neither the topic of today. The topic of today is what we have done in the southern corner of the building, is to adding these small scale accessible staircases, half private, half public, to reduce the scale of the building, to create this kind of extra movement around the building. This is on the ground, halfway landing, looking back at the Hutong area interior. Still this kind of fragmented connection with the Hutong area in front of it and to the side of it. Some use. People like to sit down on the stairs, but the use of, we've discovered that whatever we designed, whatever we imagined how people would use the building, people still have other ways of using it, calling it human creativity. The third project is in Janamani, is in the Tibetan area of Yushu. It deals with, this time, intermediate, intimate, as well as haptic scales. The building is organized around the center square courtyard. It's a typical Tibetan setup, but with 11 lookouts, the staircases that can be opened 24/7 even when the building is closed, and with a roof deck that has all these visual connections to the surrounding sides. It is located in a pretty unique cultural and religious setup, because it's located in very close to the Janamani stone pile. Itself, the Janamani stone pile is one of the best known Tibetan Buddhism cultural heritages of the region. It's a stone pile of over 2.5 billion pieces of stone. In Tibetan Buddhism, you practice religion somehow by placing these kind of inscribed stones, calling mani stones, into the big stone pile, making a contribution to the collective strength of that religion and strengthening your belief. That is basically the underlying mentality, and the entire community life, economic and social life, is organized surrounding the practice of making and piling of the stones, and including 3 major religious festivals each year. And we were asked to do the visitor center to the stone pile. And to be honest, we weren't very successful at the beginning. We made some 6 to 7 proposals, all were rejected because we didn't understand the history and the community well enough. So we invited a Tibetan professor to give us lectures, who himself was from this place, educating us basically on what the community really needs and what the story of the stone pile really was. And then we discovered actually there are more than a dozen sites that can be directly visible from our site. So the solution becomes quite easy, combined with the Tibetan way of the usual daily practice of walking around a building or a sculpture as a religious practice. So this building itself is designed in such a way that people can walk around it, going up and going down and walk around it, with all these 11 lookouts, each pointing to a site that had some kind of significance in the history of the stone pile. This shows the staircases leading up to the top. The image on the right shows an extra consideration, which is to keep all the trees. The trees in this picture don't look very old, but they are quite old, actually 60 years, because of the high altitude, 4,100. Trees grow very slowly there. We have to keep all the trees. In our design, we made a mistake in making the calculations, so in the end, one tree has to pass through the footbridge. And going back to the lookouts, and you see how these staircases and all the lookouts are pointing to the respective sites. In the center of the building, there is this typical Tibetan courtyard. Everything above the roof level, it's a two-story building, above the roof level is in wood, including some wood components recycled from pulled down buildings, from old buildings that has been pulled down. There is a natural renewing practice in this community. And the stones were made by the local masonry. And again, people use the building quite differently than we thought, including the northern piazza close to this building. They use it for picnic, which is a very usual use of the building at religious festivals. They camp near the building. And because of the corners in the design of the roof deck, actually different families can easily find different cozy corners for themselves. Children running. And the interior. I have to admit, what was actually used by the people in the interior was totally different than what we designed. Again, proving that actually, and we, the architects, were educated in such a way that we believe what we can design people's life, but actually in real life, we can't. The people residing currently looking after this building, they have a special living habit of themselves, and they do their own layout in the interior. The fourth project is in the north of China, closing to the sea in the property called Atelier, which was the brainchild of a developer. He discovered that actually all these middle class families in Beijing and in Tianjin, in the northern major cities, they like to have a vacation and second home and closing to the sea. But what then he discovered that actually selling apartments is one thing, creating a collective, redefining a new lifestyle is another. So from 2014, he started to ask emergent architects to do all the public facilities inside this Atelier community. And what we've done is we were asked to do this youthful camp. The 3,000 square meters will be used by the Atelier, which is a Chinese summer school and winter school education program firm, and very successful education firm. And this building deals with collective, intermediate, and intimate scale. The basic idea is this twisting ramp. It comes from my own experience when I was a child in the school. And the other day I was looking back at my primary school records, and then discovered that actually, and the annual comment given by the teacher from the second class to the third class, to the third year in the primary school, I have been commented by the teacher that I did run too much after the class, which was regarded as not very good. But let's face it, children do like to run. So the idea of creating this twisting ramp is based on the understanding that if we can let children run as fast as possible, given the limit, given the boundary of the site, it will be useful. So we created this twisting ramp, and two courtyards, one larger courtyard, one smaller, more closed courtyard. And here you see the property, the seaside property, used mainly by Beijing and Tianjin middle-class families as second homes, vacation homes. And what you see on the sea line are two quite iconic buildings by the architect Zhang. One is a library and the other is a small chapel. And the Atelier group, of course, they educate children in their after-school programs. The twisting ramp has all these running children in mind, and to create the most possibilities and challenging the Atelier group, because they are very good at designing children's games, educational games, outdoor games, and to design games as customized to the corners of this building. The floor plan is quite simple. You have the teaching space in the first level, and then on the second level, you have all the dorms. Everything was done in concrete, all poured on site by a local construction team. And for whatever reason, most of the building in Orania, this public facility buildings, were in raw concrete and were done by the same group of people. The corner beneath the ramp, the larger outside courtyard, the inner courtyard, surrounded by dorms, and the ramp leading up to the top, 14 meters above the ground, and then go down. The interior space is also organized around the twisting ramp. And then what's interesting is how a series of games and activities happening in these summer schools. And each year, summer school, there are more games developed than the previous year. Of course, not for this year because of COVID. It's quite interesting to see, because we work with the Atelier group on the specific slope and all the boundaries, the geometry of the ramp, and what kind of games would be used in these corners and in these sections. So first, mainly for running, you do see children running up and down. And then games developed in the corners, beneath the bridge, and of course rock climbing in the tallest pier. Large class gatherings, dancing classes, role-playing games, readings. And one interesting thing about this building, and also thank to this particular developer, that because summer school programs are not throughout the year, so when the building isn't used by the Atelier group for summer school programs, they use it for the community as a community center, and including this kind of festival events. So you have all the apartment owners in this community here using the building. And for public lectures, here you see the developer himself giving a lecture, and the title is the most important thing about a community is the shared value. The ramp, of course, gravity, it sometimes is a good asset if you want to do this large-scale collective graffiti. This happened during one of the festivals. And a dance company making specific dance designs for the ramp. The fifth project is located in Yanqing, a northwest county inside Beijing, a mountainous county. Here it deals with the smaller scales and the intermediate and intimate scale. This was the first time that we adopted this idea of actually lifting, like ripping open the ground, and create a access to the subterranean space and keeping the ground space open for the public. It's a building. It's actually a small cultural space for this very small gardening village in Yanqing. I'm not going to talk too much on the history of that village. It used to be a village used by the military back in the Ming Dynasty, which is 17th century. And when they were not doing military exercises, they do gardening. So that tradition of gardening here exists all the way up to today. And then in 2019, this entire village was renovated and creating new spaces for the public. This one is in the center. So in the center of the village, we leave the ground open as the small piazza and create a large wooden frame, which is basically a remote reminder of the legendary stage, a small theater, because in each of these barracks and military barracks, there was the only way of entertainment is to have a stage and Chinese opera. And this wooden frame is just a reminder of the previous existence of that. Of course, the stage was destructed in the late 19th century, no longer there. And then the rest of the ground is open, but tilted. And the corner lifted to create the entrance to the subterranean space. This shows the idea of ripping open the ground and giving access to the underground. The major components of the building, the frame, the tilted piazza, the ramp, and all the underground functional spaces used for exhibition. And this wasn't the first time we adopted this idea, because later in this presentation, we're going to show another project adopting the same idea, albeit in a much larger scale. The floor plans, and half indoor, half semi-open. And what we learned from this project is that there is let's say, there is a limit to normal people's capability of dealing with very steep slopes. if we look back on the project, and if you look at the corner with the trees, the lifted corner where the entrance is, that part is very steep. Most people wouldn't be able even to stand there for longer than 2 minutes. So again, learning the human body, what our bodies can and what our bodies are not very good at. So that corner. And going down, the column also serves as the lamp post. The tree connects, of course, it is the only signal that connects the roof, the ground, and the underground. This is when there are activities, indoor exhibition spaces. And what is interesting is how this tilted ground is used by people. When people see such slope, there is an inherent drive to somehow challenge the soak, to see how far he or she can go. And I do see this man pushing his children along the slope. The next project, the next two projects actually are both for the Winter Games. When I was recruited back in 2014 in Beijing's bidding team for the Beijing 2022 Winter Games, I did have questions, as well as many colleagues, why, as a Beijing, why do we need a Winter Game within 2 decades from the Summer Game from 2008? And then working along with that team, actually I got the understanding that Beijing 2022 would be very much different. It would be no longer about the creation of the event itself, but actually bring opportunities and new opportunities for the city's renewal, and in particular, the sustainable approach of a wider, broader development in the grander area around Beijing, in particular because each Winter Game has at least 2 zones. One zone is for the ice sports, which is mainly inside stadiums in the city. And then there are always the snow sports, which would use the mountains. So it generates a channel of actually giving all the opportunities and money, investment, infrastructure opportunities to the mountainous, usually less developed areas. And for Beijing, there were more than 2 zones. There are 3 zones in 2022. One city or urban zone, which is inside Beijing, mainly for the sports on ice inside stadiums. And there are 2 mountainous zones, each actually addressing a less developed area around Beijing. And that was the underlying mentality of Beijing 2022. And for Beijing, for the area of Beijing, the basic idea is to reuse and encourage the youthful to take actual sports, to leave their smartphones and computer screens. And here, what you see on the screen is actually one of the more interesting reuse project, which is a Olympic structure directly located in the reused Shogun, which is Capital Steel Factory. It's pretty huge. So it deals with macro, collective, and some corners dealing with intermediate scale. The underlying idea is about with the insertion of the Big Air venue. And Big Air, by the way, is an extreme sport, winter sport invented by the Brits. You accelerate to the speed of around 80 kilometers per hour, and then you take off, free fly for over 14, 15 meters, and then land in the stadium. A pretty challenging sport. I guess there are less than 1,000 athletes around the world who can do this really well, and mainly a continental Europe, British and North American sport. By inserting this big air venue, which is the slope, and the stadium inside this area, you create an attraction to the local community, to the younger communities living in the west of Beijing, and try to revitalize the reuse of the factory spaces, give them some sort of functions of future sports and culture-related activities, and then reuse the entire area. And there is a lake, of course. The lake was the cooling pond for the steel factory. So, of course, cooling towers. And all these 4 cooling towers you see on the screen, they were built in the span of 50 years, half a century. And here you do see this quite striking view of the factory, all the factory heritages here, including the furnace and the oxygen factory workshop, towers, ventilators, and the big air ramp. So the change of the skyline is an important gesture in the renovation of the factory. I don't know in the history of the Olympic movement whether there are other structures, Olympic structures, directly connected to an industrial heritage, but this one surely is. So the location of the venues in Beijing are mainly reused stadiums. The Shogun is quite different. It is used as a catalyst to activate this area of the factory. And before the insertion of this 2022 venue, actually Shogun has already gone through 10 years of renovation, trying to reclaim all the industrial spaces back to civic life. And many architects and planners, they have done great work here before we did this project. It was quite close to the border of the city proper. So this project includes the insertion of the slope, including the renovating of these factory spaces, including the redesign of the cooling lake. And this was done by one of the best Chinese landscape architects, my colleague in Tsinghua, Professor Zhu Yufan. We collaborated in a number of projects, and this one definitely was one of the happiest. So the entire area, with this changing profile, and I hate to say it, quite iconic profile with the big slope and the cooling towers, and becomes an attraction in the west of the city. Another important design strategy is to lower the profile of the slope. You don't want it to be taller than the cooling towers, that's for sure. You don't want the stadium to be very tall that you destroy the waterfront around the lake. So the stadium was actually sunken into the ground. So here you see how this structure in the stadium is connected to the factory fabric. The changing of the ground surface texture, they are planned for the post-game activities. This is the view the athletes would enjoy when they fly into the air. In December last year, in 2019, there was a World Cup event here. when the entire structure was lighted up. But this is not what it is about, and all these iconic features. This project is more about the use of the space and later the activity around this structure, not the structure itself. This is, by the way, this is the sport. I don't think, and there are many people who can do that. But anyway, these are truly vibrant and exciting human bodies, youthful and vibrant. And this was how it was used during that test event. And the next project is also a winter game project. It's even larger than the previous one. It is the Nordic Center for Beijing 2022, and this time is located in the valleys of Chongli, at the mountainous area, which is in 2014, in 2015, it was still one of the poorest regions around Beijing, with depleted natural resources, but some emerging ski resorts. So, and utilizing that, and the master plan of Beijing 2022 creates a snow sport zone in Chongli, and this is Nordic Center. And the idea here, of course, deals with very large scale spaces, the collective and the macro. And the idea is, because of these sports, they don't have a huge fan base in China. In China, of course, there are a growing community of skiers, but for cross-country, for biathlon, and for ski jump, there probably is not a huge fan base. So how to use this venues and when they become legacy and after 2022 is a problem. And so what we design here is thinking about the summer use, the all-season use of this entire area, the Nordic area. The idea here is the use of the ring-shaped connections. And this ring is a footbridge, actually, and half flat or nearly flat, half all the way up the mountains, to create a 3.3 kilometer ring of future outdoor activity, where you connect and all these venues. And a product of this design is that this footbridge, quite huge footbridge, is lifted above the ground. So the surface can be returned to nature after the games. And for everyone who knows major events like the Winter Games, know that they generate a lot of overlays, temporary structures, which only exist there for in a matter of a few months, and will be used in the 2 weeks of the game and then will be removed. So the permanent structure, when it's lifted from the ground, you do have the possibilities of returning the surface back to the mountains, and of course giving a view of the major venues, a special, unique experience. This is how it is now under construction. The twisting of the ring, they do somehow create this kind of spatial experience. And similar thing in the biathlon site. And here the idea is also that on the footbridge, you don't need to purchase the ticket to get into the stadium of the ski jump. You have a pretty nice coverage of what is happening in the ski jumps. There is another ring, of course, which is on top of the ski jump, which gives you the view the panoramic view of the mountain and also gives a better indication of the ski jump. And the ring here, they give you a good view of the mountain. And this we have been speaking to FIIs, which is the Federation of International Skiing, and in particular the management for ski jumps. And they welcome this move for being able to see the ski jumpers. On the left, you have the larger hill, on the right, the normal hill taking off. Because usually you only see this in TV broadcasting using special flight cameras. But now you have a physical, substantial view inside the ring, watching the ski jumpers jumping, doing this taking off from the back. And of course, and along this ring, and with the adding of the ring on the top, when it's combined with the stadium in the bottom and the profile of the slope, there is an unmistakable similarity, resemblance to the Chinese cultural object Ruyi, which would be at least well received by the Chinese public. A very minor scale project is what we did in the Suzhou garden in an exhibition of contemporary architecture inside the Master of the Net garden, curated by the Italian architect and historian Luca Molinari. We were asked, 3 Chinese architects were invited to do a temporary structure, and on whichever topic you would like to, you select a space of no more than 3 by 3 by 3 cubic. This is the volume of the outer boundary of what you can do there. What we did was closing to the exit of the garden. It's a very nice, small, private garden, and one of the best examples of how you create infinity in a limited space in traditional Chinese gardening. What we did was closing to the exit of that garden, we did a toilet. Yes, a toilet. Of course, this time it's haptic, it's only used by 1 person. The idea is that it's a distant resonance of what happened in the Chinese gardens back in pre-industrial times, is that when you have this kind of fake mountains in Chinese gardens, actually people do use it for multiple purposes, including releasing. So the idea here is to have a small waterless toilet in the center and using all the boxes, and to create this kind of artificial fake mountain. And then this toilet can be used near the exit, because there is a shortage of this kind of toilets always in these tourist popular gardens. The garden is very well known, and the main scene is this. You do see it everywhere on the web and in all kinds of books on Chinese gardens. And so here is the diagram of how this toilet actually refers to what happened in the fake mountains, the underlying technology, which is simple, and the structure, the making, and 3 separate product providers, one providing the box, the other providing the toilet, and the other providing the glass tiles, and then assembled on site in 7 days. This was the assemble, and here you see the central pit, and that would be where the toilet is. One of the best craftsmen for glass pile masonry. The toilet installed, and then the skin, if you like, or the fake mountain, if you like, created. The entire installation is open. So you enter this installation from here. This is designed to meet the profile of the real fake mountain and to make sure that only one person can pass. The path, the narrow path you have to the inside of the toilet, and on the left of what you see before you get inside, on the right what you see when you are inside. And look up, you see the sky. The detail of this kind of see-through boxes. To be honest, we found, and it has been used during its existence for about 2 weeks. It was used around 200 or so times. People do find this, in particular international tourists do find this quite usual, to use this kind of waterless and open, but still private toilets. But what we were quite surprised about was if you like, the insufficiency of the technology. The waterless toilet, and when they do advertise it, they say it is waterless and smellless, but in the end it is waterless, but not completely smellless. I guess that leaves a problem for technology to address. And very quickly, very briefly, on two projects that are still on the drawing board, and both on in the construction document stage. And both projects actually demonstrate the reality here in major Chinese cities, in particular in Beijing, that China is no longer building a lot of more spaces, but actually trying to improve the quality of the existing spaces, which means if you want to build something above the ground in the city proper of Beijing, basically, roughly speaking, you have to using it replacing the old, or you build mainly the additional spaces, the new spaces underground, subterranean, which is the case for both of these two projects. The first is the museum for the Grand Summer Palace area. And the Grand Summer Palace area, they have a long history of the development, evolution, and demise of some of its parts. And this building would be built in one of these demised sites, which is now the Haidian Public Park, a small community park near the Summer Palace. So the scale is intimate and intermediate, dealing with quite small scales again. And the idea is this: the major program is located underground, and everything on the ground is actually either egresses, entrances, or exits, or small management spaces. So we have the capability of actually doing in the fabric, in the structure of what we have, and still have, and from the record of the garden spaces used to be here, or following that same fabric, the same scale, designing people's movement, and similarly to create this new space. So you go underground, and then you go up ground again, and the above ground, they are open to the public and becomes part of the park. And here you see in the section the proportion of the underground spaces as compared to the spaces above the ground. after speaking with the director of the museum, he has the idea of bringing many of these to the public, not inside, out. Many of them So beneath the spaces, there will be this typical underground space. Of course, there is always this question here: how do you deal with the underground space? How do you apply the ergonomics to make the underground space feel not like underground spaces? Of course, it's mainly deal with light and air. We are trying to adopt different design solutions to accomplish that. And one thing special is that there are quite a number of stalking cats in the community park now. So we designed many of these lower openings just to give them a little bit of chance of moving around freely. So this time not for people, but also for stalking cats. And the last project for today is a pretty huge project in my own university. It's in Tsinghua campus. Again, it's no longer possible to build anything above the ground. If you do a new building, it has to be underground. And this time we have a one of a lifetime chance. This can be an opportunity for a lifetime, is to design something beneath a series of major sports fields. It's pretty huge. It's 4 stories beneath the ground. Here again, we adopt the same strategy as we used in Yanqing project, which is a minor project, small project. This is a huge one. We tilting because there are 4 soccer fields or football fields and 1 baseball field. So we use the leftover space, the residue space, in between these fields and also in the corner of the baseball field to lift the corner up again and having access and semi-open space in underground. Same strategy for creating this kind of meandering movement. I have been waiting for an opportunity to design something with this kind of hybridity with all the sports activities, major public sports activities above the ground, and then another type of major public activities beneath it. This time, in the end, we finally was able to do it. So the lifted corner with the surrounding buildings, you have the Schwarzman College here, you have 2 stadiums, and where we created an underground passage linking the stadiums. And here, again, you see the relationship between the major underground program and the above program sports fields. So this kind of hybridity is really something to look forward to if we can solve quite nicely the indoor quality. So there's the lifted corner again, and here you have the stair leading up to the back of the baseball field. The sunken garden, similar strategy with Yanqing project, but with bigger space and more complexity. The tunnel linking the stadiums to the sunken garden. And the entrance in between the sports fields. You're getting inside the building. First level, second level, and then a cafe, which is a very narrow one, but we somehow still managed to create this round perimeter kind of layout to link to the other side of the building. And of course, the elephant in the room here, when you have such large subterranean space, we're talking speaking of over 40,000 square meters of subterranean space, indoor air, and all the spatial perception quality is a major issue. Lighting, ventilation, sound, and smell. So we are currently making it a special topic of studying the soundscape and, if you like, smellscape of these subterranean spaces, if we can make it different than typical subterranean spaces. If only we can do that. So these projects on these 5 scales, if in a retrospective way, we gradually evolved from subconsciously doing this kind of design solution, then to consciously asking the question how this movement of the body and how these scales may help to produce spaces that would make the public facility more usable and more likable. That is the topic of today. If we may try to wrap up, is that if we can think from these 5 scales and how physiologically, psychologically, and even sociologically may help to produce a better performance of social life inside these public buildings, then we probably would get to a new domain of urban ergonomics. And if that is the case, it will be fascinating. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Lee. That is truly fascinating, the 5 scales. And of course, all the projects that you have showcased today are certainly very thought-provoking. And it's wonderful to see how you're thinking about design beyond just the building itself, the use of space, and those beneficiaries and users, which are so important and sometimes forgotten about. But it's great to see that you've thought of everything. And I've never seen such an impressive toilet either. That is really wonderful to see that in a garden. And I would never attempt that a skiing jump ever. It's not in it. I'm too scared of it. But I'm glad there are people who are using it. And again, you've thought about the longevity, the legacy Atelier built, which is again about placemaking, people, community. That is so important. Now, I know we're going to be running out of time, but I've got a few questions that's come through that I think I need to ask. And I'm going to start with, now let me see, Claire Pearson, from Beijing. She works for DLA Piper. And she said, thanks, Zhang Li, this is fascinating. Thanks for giving us your precious time on Saturday, which I've not actually said. Thank you to you for giving up a couple of hours of your Saturday. Her question is, do you think that redefining a new lifestyle is going to be the role of architects in 2020? And do you think that people like yourself, who have worked in such diverse inside-outside landscape, you talk about subterranean, like in Tibet as well, can teach others globally how to blend the inside-outside spaces for social distancing, just thinking about the future as well?
Well, I thank you very much, and Lena, for your very kind comments, and thank you, Claire, for that comment and question. Yes, I think COVID would change our views on almost everything, and if we can think about the famous quote, you only value something when you lose it. I think what COVID has taught us is how important, how precious it is to be able to meet, to get in close contact physically with people. And I think that would only make architecture and this lifestyle-related architecture more important. And so after 2020, I think we will see more people returning to the physical space and enjoying and generating better ideas about the physical space.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Now, you talk about Olympics. What are your biggest gains and challenges with those structure for Winter Olympics?
I would say is the long-term legacy. The best thing that all these sports structures can generate is that a lot of people use it. But unfortunately, if you look at those two slopes, I don't think in China there are more than maybe hundreds, 3 digits of people who will be able to use it. It might be a different case in Slovenia, for example, and 4 million people with 40,000 registered ski jumpers, but not the case here in China. So we have to combine the future legacy and somehow pre-program it in the design of the structure. For example, the ski jump venue, you see the pretty huge outlanding, where usually in Europe you have a reversed slope to reduce the size of the stadium. But that stadium actually incorporates all the use of football fields and music concerts. So that was designed for that rather than for ski jump alone. But still, try to use and generate a real legacy after 2022 is always a problem, I believe, for all these Olympic structures.
No, that's great. Now, Emma England, my colleague actually is watching today. Hello, Emma. Now, her question is, the idea of the 5 different scales is interesting. Is there a scale where you find most challenging and which is the most satisfying to work at?
Well, I would say is the family scale. And because for the individual scale, there are more commonalities than differences how people feel and perceive a surface, because we are pre-programmed, we're encoded with all the memories when we were somehow growing in mother's womb. And so that warmth, that gentle touch, it follows us all the way. But for this kind of 2 to 7 or 2 to 8 people, how the space may help people to interact better, how to create a real chemistry among people, with the space helping human bodies to interact with body gestures. It's a real question. I think that would be the hardest to measure and would be the hardest, most difficult to tackle.
Hi, Professor Lee. Thank you so much for your brilliant talk. I have one question about your project for Aranya. The developer is trying to build an ideal village to promote a new way of living for those people who could get temporary relief from stressful metropolitan life. The Aranya today is really popular for getting hits on social media due to the efforts of you and many other talented architects in China. However, people's interests are constantly changing. Now, people may use these architecture as architects designed and programmed, but this is not guaranteed in the future. So how do you think your architecture could cope with this kind of uncertainty, which may happen in the next few years? Thank you.
Well, that's a truly great question. And because I think this question actually raised a very important point, is that is people's life designable? Can we design people's life, or can we design a new lifestyle simply out of architecture, design strategies and operations? The answer is no. I have learned through my own failures, pretty reluctantly, this over the years. And people are more creative than we thought them to be, and people are different. And their demands are always changing much faster than what we architects can invent. So the kind of lifestyle, remember, it's a commercial developing, because they are developing the apartments, the main purpose to sell the apartments to the middle class, so they can use this lifestyle creating as a brand. And of course, social media rafts, they generate the hypes, they generate a certain kind of extra income to them, but it doesn't, I don't think they guarantee the long term. shall we say, change or sustained definition of a lifestyle. The best building is those buildings that are so generous. Look at the Beijing Capital Stadium, which is built in the 1950s. They have been continuously redesigned and reused, and the structure is still there, and people still regard it as one of the major components of Beijing's built fabric. I believe those buildings would work best for the long term, and therefore should be the most sustainable. So fashion and lifestyle, desirable, yes, in the market, but whether it's the most desirable for architects, no.
Right, yeah, so it allows time as the bedrock for the emergent behavior that surrounds the architecture. Yeah, fantastic. Zhang Li, thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, as Lena has had a few technical problems and she's had to drop off the line, I think she's rejoining us and trying to say goodbye. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you once again for giving up your time on a Saturday and taking us through a wonderful presentation about the beautiful architecture in China and the projects that you've been working on. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees today from around the world. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Thank you so much for all of your questions. And please stay tuned and keep your eye on RIBA International for upcoming events. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon. And Mr. Zhang Li, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and my thanks to RIBA and all the excellent supporting and technical team. It's a great pleasure and great privilege to speak here.
The pleasure is all ours. Thank you very much. And
I don't know if you can hear me now.
Oh yes, hi. Yes.
I'm sorry. The challenge of technology. Yes, just to echo. Thank you, Stuart, for stepping in. Just to echo what Stuart said, it's been fabulous. We've had some really positive messages. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Share, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you again. And thank you everybody, and have a wonderful weekend.